Welcome to the Sky Therapeutics podcast. I'm your host, Tara Torres, a clinical nutritionist, researcher, educator, and consultant specializing in areas of weight loss, autoimmune disease, gastrointestinal disorders, metabolic syndrome, and other obesity-related conditions. I help clients improve their health through proper functional nutrition, professional-grade supplement protocols, exercise recommendations, education, and support using a personalized, evidence-based approach. At Sky Therapeutics, we offer functional nutrition solutions for chronic disease and help our clients develop sustainable lifestyle habits that will last a lifetime. As a friendly reminder, the information and opinions provided here today is to be taken as general information only, and you should always contact your personal physician or other qualified healthcare professional if you have any questions about your personal health and wellness. Hi there, welcome back to our latest episode, Digestive Wellness, Nutrition's Role in Colon Cancer Prevention. With me today, I have my partner, Dr. Carrie Felmley. And if you don't know already, March is colon cancer awareness. Colon cancer is one of the most common cancers worldwide, but it's also highly preventable and treatable if detected early. So some of the things we're going to be reviewing in this episode are risk factors. We're going to talk about age, family history, certain genetics, and of course, diet and lifestyle. We'll touch on some symptoms to be aware of, and we really want to focus on the healthy lifestyle and nutrition. So we'll talk about things to avoid, things that you can add in, and we'll talk about how to maintain a healthy weight, physical activity, and all of the different things that you need to know to reduce your risk for developing colon cancer. So stay tuned. And as always, if you guys have any questions following this episode, please let us know. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our newest episode where we're going to be talking about colon cancer awareness and how to reduce your risk factors for developing colon cancer through nutrition and lifestyle. With me is my partner, Dr. Carrie Felmley. Say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so let's talk about colon cancer. Colon cancer is also known as colorectal cancer, and it's a type of cancer that starts in the colon or your rectum. And the colon is pretty large. There, you have your large intestine, and then the rectum is where the waste comes out. And most cases, colon cancer can begin pretty small, as like non-cancerous clumps or lumps, or you may have heard them called polyps. And this is why there's such an emphasis on getting routine screening once you hit a certain age. And I know insurance has kind of gone back and forth about what that age is. Some insurances offer it at as young as 40 years old now, right? I've heard 45, some are still doing 50. But I think more and more people are becoming aware that it needs to be done sooner, right?
It does need to become sooner, but also be very conscientious if you have a family history of colon cancer. Insurances tend to be pretty good about covering at the same age that somebody else was diagnosed with it. So if your father was diagnosed at 25, then you are clearly at risk for colon cancer. And most of the time, your insurance company will start to cover something right around that 25 age mark or whenever your family member was diagnosed. So be aware of that. That's worth looking into as well.
I'm so glad you pointed that out because I think, we are our biggest advocate. And sometimes those minor details can get overlooked when you're in a provider's office and they're just kind of like running and gunning patient to patient, and kind of, especially a screening colonoscopy. So don't be afraid to step up and say, hey, my mom or dad or somebody had it at this age. And also be aware of like your own personal history, which I think is definitely not going to be as overlooked because, somebody with a history of irritable bowel disease or something like that is going to also be in a higher risk for developing something like colon cancer just because of the inflammatory nature of a bowel disease like that. So ulcerative colitis or people with Crohn's disease. You also want to look at age. So definitely 50 is a risk factor. And then lifestyle factors, like what, Carrie? Physical activity.
People also, activity is what I think people forget a lot, is how active we are actually is intricately linked with our gut microbiome and the health of it. And that activity plays a huge factor when it comes to risk of colorectal cancer. So one of the biggest risk factors is not being active at all, leading a really sedentary lifestyle. And along with that goes weight. Unfortunately, being more overweight and obese is a huge risk factor when it comes to colorectal cancer.
Mhm.
But both of those are also going to be impacted by diet. And in my opinion, one of the biggest risk factors is having a chronic long-term poor diet filled with processed foods, processed meats, different kind of inflammatory oils, fried foods, different kind of things like that. We're really trying to increase what's known as antioxidants in our diet, which are different molecules that are actually going to help reduce inflammation throughout the body. And we're also looking for a really high fiber-rich diet, which is integral in maintaining the gut microbiome health and all the muscles along the intestinal tract as well. So the standard American diet is chronically deficient in fiber. I haven't looked at the latest research in probably a couple of years, but last time I looked at it, the standard American diet was almost in the single digits, if not in the single digits, as low. I think the lowest study I found was on average about 7 grams a day. So that is, as a reference point, we should be getting about 30 grams of fiber at least from our foods every day. And I don't know about you, Tara, but when I have that conversation with patients, the number one first question that I always get asked is, what supplement can I be on? And yes, supplements can help fill in gaps in our diet, but they're not meant to be the strategy to prevent colorectal cancer. That really needs to be coming from food. And a big part of that is because there are more than just carbs, fat, protein, and fiber in a food, like a tomato that's made up. That tomato has literally thousands and thousands of molecules that all play together, and in totality, we call that the food matrix. And there is absolutely no way that we can isolate and research each of those thousands of nutrients and know what the impact is when we isolate the fiber away from all the other antioxidants and things that are in that vegetable or fruit or food substance. So yeah, fiber is okay. And I know that I add fiber to my smoothies. I know you add fiber to your smoothies in addition to the vegetables I'm putting in there. So I'm definitely going to throw in a handful of frozen cauliflower. Actually is great to get something cold, or a handful of spinach. But it's not how I rely on getting my fiber, which is a huge distinction I think you and I cumulatively share with our patients.
Right. And I think it's important to understand there's a time and a place for supplements. And so we may use them in the short term of somebody that we recognize is super low, and say, hey, while you are learning these habits and learning how to integrate these foods more and more frequently and more consistently, sure, here's a supplement to kind of help you over that hump. But
Yep.
ideally, I think you and I are hoping, and every nutrition professional I would hope is hoping to teach people how to get this from their diet alone.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah, diets high in fiber have consistently been linked with reduced colon cancer risk. And, fibers help to move waste throughout the digestive system more quickly, reducing the time that potentially harmful substances are in contact with the lining of your colon. So think of sources like your fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and nuts as your biggest fiber sources.
100,000% agree. But the other side to that is, yes, we need to think about what we need to increase as far as the antioxidants of fiber in the diet, like we've talked about. But the other side of that is, what do we need to reduce in the diet?
Mhm.
And what we're aiming to do is we're really aiming to reduce the overall inflammation throughout the digestive tract as a whole, the intestines and the colon being part of that structure. So different kind of things that absolutely are going to inflame the gut are going to be alcohol. Not that alcohol can't be consumed in moderation, but alcohol by nature of what it is and what it does is inflammatory in nature and absolutely inflames the gut lining. It does. So repeated overuse of it, overconsumption of it is absolutely going to contribute to that. But
Mhm.
also, you and I talked about not too long ago, is one of the biggest differences between conventional dietetics and functional nutrition is how we view fats. And there is a huge difference because, yes, conventional studies are going to look and say the reduction of red meat is absolutely integral when it comes to reducing your risk of colorectal cancer. Functional nutrition disagrees with that a little bit. It's when you look at the studies, it's not the amino structure that makes up the protein of an animal protein. So the filet mignon, the animal, the protein structure of that lean part of that steak is not the problem. The problem comes in the quality of the raising of that protein and the fat that the animal produces. There are two different types. If an animal is organic fed 100%, grass fed, and free range, it has to be all three of those. And unfortunately, even when I walk in Whole Foods, I see a grass fed section, I see a free range section, I see an organic section, and that doesn't help. If it's one or two of those, it doesn't help us. And manufacturers are very, very tricky. They will say grass raised. Well, that still means they're corn finished. So the fat that that animal is producing, it's actually twisted in nature. And so when an animal is actually raised properly, the chains of the fat actually are on the same side. And what that basically means is that's what's called a CLA fat. A CLA fat is anti-inflammatory in nature. It is weight loss promoting. It is disease preventing. And that includes cancer preventing. It is everything good that you would want in the world. It is when an animal isn't raised with all three of those things, specifically when it comes to red meat, that the fat that the animal produces is actually twisted. And when the branches are actually on opposite sides, that's what's called a trans fat. And at this point, almost everybody has heard of trans fats, the evils of trans fats, to such extent that even the government has put regulations in place to limit trans fats in our foods. If it's gotten to the point where the government has done it, it's gone way too far. So that is the huge difference between conventional recommendations and a functional nutrition recommendation. They're going to say reduce your red meat or avoid red meat. We're going to say it's okay to have red meat in moderation along with everything else, but you have to make sure that the quality is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a great, point to make. I think a lot of people get really confused with food labeling and how our foods are raised, but taking it a step further, I also wanted to point out deli meats,
Yeah.
how they're associated just because of, the processing, and nitrates have been linked with a higher risk of colon cancer. So just be aware of what you're buying and how often you're consuming these types of products.
Yeah.
But when it comes to healthy and inflammation, certain fats are going to be pro-inflammatory and increase inflammation, and certain fats are going to be what we call anti-inflammatory and fight inflammation. So, some things that come to mind when it comes to healthy fats outside of animal fats would be things like nuts and seeds, avocados, olive oil, olives, and those types of things have been linked with a lower and reduced risk of colon cancer. And
100%.
yes. And to piggyback on your comment about alcohol, right? You had mentioned that the American Cancer Society recommends no more than 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men. And you also want to be cognizant of other toxins like smoking. So, alcohol, we know, causes a lot of inflammation in the body, specifically the gut, because that's something you're consuming and it's literally going down into your stomach and your intestines, right? But I think people just think, oh, smoking, lung cancer. Like, no, it's still a toxin, and all of these systems are interconnected, and we need to be aware that that is potentially a risk factor for you as well.
Absolutely.
So limit your processed red meats. And then I also wanted to piggyback on something else you said, things that we can include. You talked about the fiber, but also calcium and vitamin D have been linked to a reduced risk of colon cancer. So make sure you're getting good food sources of both of those. Make sure you're getting outside for vitamin D. I think they recommend, the first 15 minutes in the morning is the best to get it synthesized naturally through sunlight, but you can also get it from like fatty fish and, like salmon. And for other fortified food supplements, of course, they recommend 2 to 5,000 IUs daily for maintenance. And I also, just because we're on the subject, I have to get on my soapbox about vitamin D really quick. Too often, people will have their lab work tested and it comes back and it's hovering around the bottom of the range. The reference range is usually 30 to 100. And too
Yeah,
often I'll see people be like, oh, it was like 28, 29, barely 30 or something. And my doctor just said, oh, it's fine.
you're
Or
fine.
eat
Mhm.
more or, well, it's not a big deal. But let me tell you guys something. More and more studies are coming out showing that we have better health and better immune support with that number being closer to like 70, 80, 90. In fact, over in, I think it's England or Europe, they actually support it closer to 150. Now, I'm going to caution you and I'm going to say that there is such a thing as vitamin D toxicity. So just always make sure you're working with your provider to make sure you get your routine blood work done. But vitamin D is absolutely important for overall health, immune health, and reducing your risk of cancer. And like I said, calcium, you can get that from dairy products. It's in a lot of fortified products. It's in your leafy greens. Even a lot of people are dairy free, so don't forget that. And even like tofu and stuff. So if you're not getting a lot of animal products, you can definitely get it there. But those are two nutrients that can help you. And just overall, being that we're functional medicine nutrition providers, we want to emphasize the importance of all of the nutrients and making sure that you're not deficient anywhere, right?
Yeah. To piggyback a little bit on the vitamin D talk,
Mhm.
though, is the vitamin D conversation is so vastly important, but it's so broad and vague. Even when you look at the studies of what level is right for someone, because they're having to look at populations oftentimes. So there is also a huge difference in the way that conventional versus functional medicine providers are going to look at vitamin D. Yes, some conventional providers absolutely could be advocating for a higher level of vitamin D. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is most functional medicine providers are also going to try and customize and really look to see what level of vitamin D does your particular body want and function best at. Yes, it is absolutely true that a level of at least 90 gives an anti-inflammatory effect on the body. That's one of the reasons why we tend to push autoimmune patients a little bit higher so that we can get their inflammation down and support their immune system a little bit better. But most of the time, a functional medicine provider is not just going to order a vitamin D level. They're going to order something called a PTH or a parathyroid hormone panel as well. And there is an inverse relationship between vitamin D and PTH. So the higher your vitamin D is going to go, the lower your PTH is going to go. And there are certain thresholds where we want to see both the vitamin D and the PTH. And we can see when the PTH really hits that sweet spot, then that is really where your body is wanting that vitamin D to sit. For somebody, that could be 48. I have had a patient that wants their vitamin D levels at a 48, which, you know, studies show us really optimization is 60 to 80 most of the time. But that's not always true. I have had patients that their body wants to sit around 100, 110. And we have not had any problems with any type of vitamin D toxicity, but we do keep a close eye on it. And we definitely adjust the dosages a little bit until we learn their yearly rhythm, because vitamin D is also going to be something that your immune system, it's going to ebb and flow in your body with its stores. So for instance, what we see most of the time is in winter, when we think of cold and flu season, we think of a lot of different illnesses that tend to heighten in those colder months. You need a lot more support from your immune system, and your body tends to want a little bit higher of a level during those winter months to support that immune system. So until we kind of figure out a rhythm of what is your dosage in the winter, the spring, the summer, the fall, to keep you in that sweet spot, to keep the inflammation levels down, to keep your immune system supported. Until we find that rhythm, we're going to tend to monitor a little bit to make sure that dosage is right.
And this is why we practice individualized medicine, right? Because, you know, I think we always have to kind of look through everything through, especially when it comes to like health and nutrition, with a little perspective and understand that this is all very nuanced and very unique to everybody. So, as always, make sure you filter your information through the context of your labs with your
Mhm.
provider so that you guys can make sure that you're getting everything that you need. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So let's talk about, let's see, we talked about diet. We're going to have a couple free handouts that we're going to link in our call today so you can download them. We have your guide to cancer, to reducing your risk of cancer, not necessarily colon cancer, but it's still, all relatable. So if you guys are interested in that little guide, you can download it. It's your ultimate guide to nutrition and cancer prevention. And then we're going to have a couple different handouts for reducing cancer risk. So like the AICR recommendations for cancer prevention, which I think is like the Academy of something cancer research. It's a cancer research organization, but they basically are in consensus with reducing alcohol, red meat, sugar, sweetened drinks, sugar in general, because we know sugar is
Yeah.
going to mess up your gut microbiome. Um, they also recommend eating a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans. And then they also recommend a healthy weight and not using supplements for cancer prevention. We're using supplements to enhance your diet and all these other things, right? Um, so that just goes to show you, like, we're not just talking and preaching nutrition because we're clinical nutritionists or functional medicine nutritionists. Like, this is the consensus of the research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The last thing that I want to piggyback on here is obviously we're trying to focus on optimizing the gut microbiome. So a stool test is super important for every single person, every couple years, every 2, 3 years at least. I'd recommend monitoring your gut microbiome and making adjustments where they need to be made. But the other thing that functional nutrition is really going to look at as far as cancer causing agents is going to be different types of toxins. So ultraviolet radiation, asbestos, arsenic, different kind of mold toxicities, heavy metals, different kind of pesticides on our food that build up in our body of those toxins is absolutely linked with cancer risk prevention. So that's something else to really consider that you can do nutrition wise is optimize all your detoxification pathways with your food to help your body process all those toxins that we're all exposed to on a daily basis.
That's a great point. Early stages of colon cancer may not have any symptoms. So as the cancer grows, maybe then you'll get symptoms. So maybe then you'll experience a change in bowel habits. This could be diarrhea, constipation, or just changes in the stool consistency for some people. Others may have blood in the stool, which is a big deal. If you have any sort of abdominal discomfort or pain, that's not normal. If you're feeling fatigue or weakness, along with these things, unexplained weight loss is also seen a lot of times, or the feeling of like an incomplete evacuation. If you go to the bathroom, you don't feel like you're completely getting rid of
Yep.
everything. You definitely
Yep.
want to get in touch with your provider and make sure you're just getting your screenings done. Again, a stool test is a great non-invasive way to kind of take a peek at this.
Yep.
Um, I love the information we get from a stool test, from looking at inflammation markers, digestive markers, how you're breaking down and absorbing foods, how you're utilizing these foods, and just like your ecosystem, right? Like if you look at your gastrointestinal tract, like a rainforest ecosystem, there's all of these naturally occurring bacterias and yeast and things that are naturally in there, right? And what happens when we're not eating, if we're eating a standard American diet, which is not a lot of fiber, kind of processed, inflammatory, right? We're going to see
Yep.
changes in this environment. And so maybe some of our beneficial bacteria drop down. And in the absence of those beneficial bacteria, we're going to see what we call potentially pathogenic or opportunistic bacteria overgrow. And that's where we start to see issues. So make sure you're going in and, like Carrie suggested, getting a stool test every couple of years is great. If you're having any of these signs that I mentioned, speak with your doctor. The way that they detect colon cancer. So if you don't have a family history, are they still doing Cologuard, that mail-in kit? But you can't have any family history or personal history, right? That's for people who don't want to do a
Mhm.
colonoscopy.
But it
Um,
should be very, very clearly stated, in my opinion. Yes, that's an option. Yes, many GI providers are using them for patients that don't want to do a colonoscopy, but there is no better way to prevent colon cancer than a colonoscopy.
Yeah.
A test with biomarkers is only going to get you so far. And I don't know a single GI provider that would, in their mind, consider it equal as a colonoscopy.
No,
So,
a colonoscopy is the gold standard.
gold standard and life saving, because they can take out those polyps right on the spot as is. So oftentimes, I mean, obviously if it's grown and it's too large, they can't, but even in those situations, that's huge to understand about your colon health situation.
Right.
So
But if grandma is pushing 90 something years old and we're not wanting to put her under for something, it's good to know that you have those options for certain populations. But really,
definitely a
gold
good option.
standard colonoscopy, get a biopsy, get that pathology, make sure everything's good, get rid of those polyps so you can have a healthy, clean colon and you can have regular bowel movements with no issues. They can also do imaging sometimes. But again, that those are all of your options, but the colonoscopy is the gold standard.
It is a gold
Um,
standard. And one of the things I have learned working with alongside several GI providers is part of the colonoscopy that not everybody does is actually taking the scope all the way up into the terminal ileum. So before you go in for your colonoscopy, when you are talking with your GI provider, I would definitely be asking that question of whether or not they're going to go as far as up into the terminal ileum or not. And if not, I would be requesting that be done.
Good point. Good point. So just remember, while not all colon cancer can be prevented, there are steps that you can take to improve your overall health and reduce your risk. So remember to maintain a healthy weight, body composition, eat a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains. Try to limit your consumption of red and processed meats, like those deli meats we mentioned. Exercise regularly, avoid smoking and alcohol, and make sure you get your regular screenings, especially if one of your risk factors is a family history of colon cancer.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Carrie. I always love
Yeah.
having you here and your information and your wisdom, and you always point out new things that I forget to mention. So, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we will see you next time.
See you next time, everybody. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Sky Therapeutics podcast with your host, that's me, Tara Torres. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to check out any bonus info and links in the show notes. You can visit us at www.skytherapeutic.com or find us on social media because we love connecting with our audience. Until next time, be well.